Binh Dahn was born in Vietnam in 1977. When he was 2, his family fled the country, eventually settling in Northern California. His experimental art combines science and history and explores themes of memory and trauma, identity and war, often using landscape and the natural world as both subject and inspiration, but also using it as a medium and a process in creating his work. As a boy, he came to know the formations of nearby Yosemite National Park only through photographs. And as he's never been able to visit, his latest work finally takes us both there. Please welcome Binh Dahn.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm a landscape photographer. As a kid, my introduction to landscape was through the photographs that came out of the Vietnam War. Although we might classify these images as war photography, when I was looking at them, I saw them as family photographs. I was trying to make sense of my own history, having to leave as a refugee after the Vietnam War. In these pictures, I got a sense of my birthland being torn apart. The lush green tropics was being contrasted by the color of blood and flesh. In 1999, I visited Vietnam for the first time. I noticed that remnants of the war were still part of the landscape, such as remnants of bomb craters that had been converted into rice paddies. So I started a body of work of appropriating the Vietnam War imageries and printing them onto leaves by the process of photosynthesis. I thought, what if the plants could witness these horrific events? What would they remember? What could they teach us? Nature remembered the traumas in the elements that compose the landscape. And when I think about trauma, I relate it back to the body. So since the beginning of time, when I was looking at landscape photography, I was thinking about the body. A couple years ago, I found this wonderful tintype at an antique shop. It shows 3 Chinese men posing in front of a studio backdrop depicting a forest scene. The image made me wonder about how the Asian body fits into this landscape. During the California gold rush, Chinese labor laid the railroad tracks, dug the mines to the gold fields, but a lot of those depictions are written out of mainstream history. So I started collecting more photographs of bodies in the natural landscape. On your left is a group portrait of European Americans at Mirror Lake in Yosemite Valley. And this photograph is about how the body could be reflected in the land. And in this picture on the right, where someone wrote Indian Boy YP. And perhaps YP means Yellowstone Park. And for me, this picture speaks about the complicated history of the steward of this land before it became known as America. So how, as a nation, do we reflect onto this majestic landscape while we're experimenting with democracy? So I wanted to explore reflection in my work, and I taught myself the daguerreotype process. The daguerreotype is a unique photographic image on a silver copper plate that was invented in 1839. While holding a daguerreotype, viewers could see their own reflections in the mirror surface of the plate. It was described as a mirror with a memory, a mirror that was held up to your face and remembers your likeness. In this installation, the viewer also sees herself in the mirror surface of the plate, contemplating the 1970s Cambodian genocides in the here and now. Now, there are wonderful characteristics of the daguerreotype. Since the plate that goes into the camera is the actual photograph, you will get a first-generation image that is extremely high resolution. In the early years of this medium, people couldn't understand how it was possible to get that much details into an image. Photography was a new form of representation. It was hard to wrap one's head around the idea that a simple camera obscura could record a photograph. Only something like this could be made by the spirit world. When Louis Daguerre demonstrated his process on the street of Paris, the crowd thought that he was tricking them. How could someone draw a picture so fast? It was mysterious. A man underneath a dark cloth, composing with a camera, and then disappearing into another dark tent and emerging with a daguerreotype in his hand, with an exact copy of the brilliant scene in front of them. Today, we understand this as photography, and we no longer have to go into a dark tent to make our photographs. But we forget that the daguerreotype itself was one of the first forms of nanotechnology. When making a daguerreotype, you are drawing with light on an atomic level. The image is made of tiny silver crystal that have been electrically charged by the action of light on the iodine silver plate. The daguerreotype is a stunning photograph, and it's impossible to replicate because of its mirror surface. But what is possible is that I'm able to digitally scan the plate to reveal other details that my naked eye could not see. In this Grand Canyon plate, because the exposure was about 1 minute, those people who stood still for that time got recorded. Some people stood still as solid as the canyon, trying to not to fall in. They become more noticeable. Others are more ghostly because they were moving around, trying to take in the view from different angles. These are tiny people standing on a rock. Some are Americans, and many more are foreign tourists, and the national park have become the international parks. And people who are taking pictures and posing for them stood still long enough for my camera to record them, like this party here, where the lady was posing for the man holding a camera. So many photographs and memories are made at the national park. This is Moran Point, named after the great American landscape painter Thomas Moran. When I was exposing this plate, I was hoping that the man standing on the rock would hold still long enough for my shutter to record him, and luckily he did. Not a lot of people climb out on one of these rocks, and of course you can imagine it's pretty dangerous. And it seems like he's looking at the pictures on his phone and uploading them onto social media, instantly sharing his memories with the world. So when daguerreotype came out in the 1840s, it was the only practical forms of photography. It was popular in making portraiture work and became the bread and butter for the new photographic profession. There were thousands of daguerreotype studios across the globe. Today, daguerreotypes are obsolete as a form of commercial photography. In that way, they are truly an art form. The daguerreotype does not represent reality the way we see it. Here, solid rocks are made heavenly like cotton candies. Yosemite National Park was the first of the national parks that I visited with my daguerreotype van that I nicknamed Louis. This is El Capitan, exposed on June 20, 2011. And in a few more days, this daguerreotype will be 5 years old. It's a record to where I was on that day. In Ken Burns' PBS series, The National Park, Carol Pope, the past executive director of the Sierra Club, said, "My sense is that our special connection with the national parks comes from the fact that we're a nation of immigrants. We're a nation of people for whom this is not home, and the national parks are what anchors and root us on this continent. They are the meanings of home for many of us. They're what it means to be an American, to inhabit this continent. It's at the end of the immigrant experience. And they're what takes you and say, now I'm an American." So this is Yosemite Fall on March 8, 2012. And many people ask me if I have tinted the waterfalls. The answer is no. The blue tint of the waterfall was caused by the overexposed highlight, shifting the tones to the blue spectrum. This is April 15, 2012, May 21st, and by October, the waterfall is almost dry. Now, since the daguerreotype is a mirror image, if you were standing here in front of Lower Yosemite Fall, you will see this, but the daguerreotype will record this. This is a 10 by 12 inch plate-sized daguerreotype, really large for 19th century standard, where the largest plate were made around 8 by 6 inches, known as full plate. After the American Civil War, many landscape photographers working for the Matthew Brady studio start publishing photographs of war, and for the first time, the public were able to see the carnage of a nation divided. But it was not well received. People didn't want to face the reality of war. War was supposed to be heroic, like in the fictionalized painting that commemorated past war. Here, war was still, quiet. There were no glorious scenes. Wet plate photographers did not have a shutter short enough exposure to capture action. Instead, 19th century photographers came in when the battles were over. Union Army General William Sherman said, "Anyone who is not satisfied with war should go and see Charleston, and he will pray louder and deeper than ever that the country in the future will be spared of any more wars." But then a different type of photographs had begun circulating from photographers in the West, like here Carlton Walken's Yosemite photographs, or those by Edward Muybridge, George Friss, and Charles Weed. The Yosemite photographs sparked President Abraham Lincoln in 1864 to sign legislation giving Yosemite Valley to the state of California, upon the express condition that the premise shall be held for the public use, resort, and recreation. This sets the stage for the creation of the National Park Service. Americans living in cities couldn't believe that there were places like this around the country. The 19th century photographs renew a commitment to the Union that the land was beautiful and the land needed to be preserved. And in Abraham Lincoln's word, a house divided against itself cannot stand. This is Cathedral Rock. So in my daguerreotype of Yosemite Valley, I wanted to show the greatest hits of the valley in much the same way Watkins and Ansel Adams did, and thousands of photographers before me have done. I have approached Yosemite Valley with classical eyes, as I have been basing my composition on my memories of Yosemite seen in those early photographs. Now, this scene was taken with my cell phone to show you my camera, which is wrapped up with my dark cloth to avoid light leaks. I used a very large early 20th century camera that was made in India for the sole purpose of travel photography. This is Three Brothers. And I cannot photograph Yosemite Valley without imagining that Watkins or Adams peeking over my shoulder. They are my saints. And I often find myself praying to them to give me a stunning exposure. But in reality, it's really hard to make a bad picture of Yosemite Valley. Good pictures are everywhere you turn. It's kind of quite overwhelming. This is Bridal Veil Fall. Carlton Walken was one of the first photographers to make really large photographs of Yosemite Valley. He had to carry his darkroom tent into the landscape and coated his 18 by 22 inch glass plate negatives under difficult condition. He developed them right there and carried the negatives back to his studio in San Francisco to make the print. I imagine in his time, just finding a way to Yosemite Valley was hard enough. Today, we have good roads and GPS maps, friendly park rangers. We could even go online and check out the webcams or the weathers before we jump into the car. This is El Capitan from Cathedral Beach. And this is Overhanging Rock at Glacier Point. And this is El Capitan again. And this daguerreotype was made at the Sororo National Parks, where one could find giant cactuses. And these sororos are so animated. And I think part of the reason why they're so attractive is because they take up a human-like form. And here's a more grand view. And if you are looking at this plate, you could actually count the numbers of sororos through a magnifying glass. In the 19th century, there were stories of people counting the numbers of bricks on a building in a daguerreotype. The daguerreotype was their 4K display. Or here in this hill, in this Sororo National Park, and if I zoom in here, in this pile of rock, you could view the petroglyphs made eons ago by the ancient Hohokam people. In a short drive away, one could find Painted Rocks, a petroglyph site under the Bureau of Land Management, or Newspaper Rock, historical monument in Utah, where these three figures are examining the petroglyphs on this wall. The first carvings were made around 2,000 years ago. Now, speaking of the body in the land, here is Skull Rock at Joshua Tree National Park in California. You can make out the rock that looks like a skull, a representation of memento mori, and a reminder that we will die someday. And in this composition here, I was taken by this rock formation. It reminds me of teeth, something I do twice a day: brush my teeth, polishing my bones, keeping myself from decaying. Or this rib bone-like formation called Delicate Art in Arches National Park in Utah. And even Death Valley National Park in California represent the body. This is from Dante's view, looking down at Badwater Basin, the lowest point in North America. And Death Valley's name was given by a group of pioneers lost in the winter of 1850. Later, after being rescued, the party climbed out of the valley. One of the men turned, looked back, and said, "Goodbye, Death Valley." This is Zerberke's Point in Death Valley. And nearby Death Valley, the body is more visible, particularly the imprisoned bodies of Japanese nationalists and Japanese Americans during World War II. And this is an obelisk next to a cemetery. And today, this site is known as Manzanar National Historical Site. And across the field is a replica of a guard tower. And I made this daguerreotype after sunset and overexposed the sky, giving it a more ominous tone by chance. Between 15,000 and 2,000 years ago, the craters of the moon lava field formed in present-day Idaho. And you could roam the landscape and view these amazing lava formation. The park rangers called these rocks bombs. And before they cooled down, the bombs were hot globs of lavas that were launched from the volcanoes. They form a variety of interesting shapes that looks like brains and hearts. So I photographed the park rangers carrying these bombs in their arms as caretakers of the parks. From left to right is Ranger Owens, Ranger Smith, and Ranger Durbin. On August 30th, 2015, President Obama announced through an executive order that Mount McKinley was being renamed Delilah. As a result, restoring an Alaska Native name with deep cultural significance to the tallest mountain in North America. ending a 40 years petition by the Alaskan natives to restore the original name of the mountain. I think one of President Obama's legacy is being the protector of public spaces. He has protected more than 265 million acres of Americans' public land and waters, more than any other president in history. He has also taken bold steps to protect places that are culturally and significantly important to diverse communities of Americans. In 2012, the president announced the Cesar Chavez National Monument in California. And there's plan to name the Stonewall Inn as the first national monument to LGBT rights. It is now a scary time as we move into the general presidential election period. The one thing for sure that we have to commit to in Terry Tempest Williams' word is the open space of democracy. We must reflect, imagine, and reimagine, and participate in democracy. So thank you very much.